Hello, everyone. Before we get too technical, Anthony, will you tell us a little bit about Thinking Capital and what your role is within the organization?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Thinking Capital, and we are the first mover in the alternative lending space in Canada. We've been around since 2006. We've put about $400 million out to the market and about 10,000 deals out there. And we are based in Montreal and Toronto. So, Pat, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience prior to joining Thinking Capital?
Okay, so I'm currently the CTO at Thinking Capital. Have the better part of 20 years working in the Canadian banking industry, always occupying managerial roles within their tech departments. I also launched my own software development company, a little startup, about 8 or 9 years ago, kept it for 2 or 3 years. We served a very niche market in the brokerage industry. But I certainly have nothing but experience in the financial services area.
Great. So what did you find in terms of the technology when you joined Thinking Capital?
So it was really interesting because I left a bank that I had been with for a very long time, and as many people in the audience here already know, banks have a tendency of owning their technology and building their technology, and everything is in-house, and cloud conceptually is not something that banks are comfortable with in general, specifically not in Canada. So I joined an organization which was more or less a startup. There was no technology department to speak of. 100% of our tech was cloud-based. 100% of our development was outsourced. 100% of anything we did was done through third-party organizations. So I was essentially mandated with mitigating the risk associated with that, but it would be a lie to say that it wasn't a learning curve. I had never really dealt with custom development across cloud-based platforms. So there was somewhat of a learning curve within the organization. We've since grown immensely. We now, 3 years ago there was 1 person in technology. We're up to about 40 now. But we are still 100% cloud-based. Our entire platform, our entire business runs via cloud-based architecture.
So quite a big shift for you, for sure. So, when you come from a world full of compliance, it obviously impacts your decisions a little differently. As you said, Thinking Capital, fast-growing company, not a lot of infrastructure. How did that, influence your decisions moving forward on how to build the organization?
Well, the issue of coming from banking, and again, for anyone that's ever worked in a banking environment, technology and compliance go hand in hand. And there's governance models in place, and there's structure in place, and oftentimes it's seen as red tape for technologists because something as simple as a firewall rule change will take 18 weeks to implement. Not to mention the fact that the business itself is completely filled with rules and regulations on how you handle and manipulate data. Then I moved into an industry which was the alternative lending industry, which in Canada has no compliance, no governance, no rules. You essentially can come in and do whatever you like. So the funny part about that was, on one hand, I felt like a kid in a candy store because there were no limitations on speed to market, no limitations on cutting corners, no limitations on being able to build quick and release quick. The flip side was it gave us, as an industry leader in Canada, the opportunity to set the bar for compliance and build in an ethical model and bring in all those rules that I was so accustomed to with regards to banking and protection mechanisms, and pick and choose the ones that would allow us to maintain the quickness that we had and the agility that we had without putting at risk the information that we were gathering, because we were essentially a data mart and we were gathering a lot of customer information. So that was really the most interesting part, was how do you leverage security from a compliance perspective without hindering your capacity to get to market really quickly.
Interesting. So ultimately, you decided to build out a framework that was based on Salesforce. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision and where the technology has moved from that point?
Sure. I almost wish I could say that I was the one that chose Salesforce, but I inherited that. The company had started about 3 or 4 years earlier, and at the time, that was a platform that was selected as a CRM tool For anyone that knows the Salesforce platform, it's a lot more than a CRM tool. So as the business grew, the original need was really just CRM. Let's get customer information into a database so that they could click to dial, essentially. But as the company grew and as they gained a lot of momentum, they stayed within the Salesforce environment and kept building upon that original base. Now, truth be told, Salesforce checks all the boxes for the type of business we run. We run our entire business within the Salesforce model. That being said, we do sales, we do marketing, we do accounting, of course, the CRM, all business rules, everything, every part of our business is run through, at some point, it runs through the Salesforce environment. So I didn't choose it, though even had I had the opportunity to choose it, it's more than likely that would have been the selection.
Great. So in terms of outsourcing versus building internally, how do you view that, from an IP perspective? Is that something that you're concerned about? The amount that you're outsourcing, the amount that's in the cloud versus building internally?
Well, I come from a world where everything was in-house. So we had data centers, we had hundreds of employees managing, we had support, we had development, we had the whole gamut of technology services. And then I'm introduced to a world of zero technology in-house, which is somewhat of an issue to deal with when you're essentially old school. Truth is, in order to be in a disruptive market, like most of the people in this audience are trying to be part of, you can't be disruptive and legacy. It becomes rather, it's an impossibility. You cannot be disruptive and legacy. So it was a forced change, and it was a way to reintroduce myself to technology and understand the things we could accomplish with some of the pitfalls included with cloud-based technologies. So we build and develop just as much as we would if the platform existed in-house, if we weren't in Salesforce and everything was custom Java build or anything like that. We're not building any less. It's just that we're building within an existing container that already has about 14 years of development in it. And it makes things much, much easier from a support perspective, much easier from a development perspective. We currently have approximately 270,000 lines of custom code. So it isn't like we're not building custom software. It's just that the custom software is not hosted in a data center that Thinking Capital pays for. Though I can assure you Thinking Capital pays for it no matter where it sits. But at the end of the day, we're building just as much. There's no limitation to how we develop.
So in terms of proprietary software that we're building internally, is there anything that is external to Salesforce? What other kind of tools are you using?
One of the issues when I joined the firm was that literally every line of code was a Salesforce line of code, which in and of itself carries some risk in the sense that all of our eggs were in a single basket. And for certain things, because we are a lending company, for example, our decisioning engine cannot be down, quote unquote. So what we've done is we've slowly siloed different pieces of our product so that some of them now exist in the cloud but outside of Salesforce. This way we don't have a single point of failure anymore as we did when we first started. But most of it still at some point will route through Salesforce. But we have SQL in the cloud and we have a lot of different JavaScripting that's taking place that's outside of Salesforce and things of that nature.
Sure. So I'm sure a lot of people in the audience face similar things when you're building onto external platforms versus internal. Is talent a challenge?
Well, I would say that when you're building on a cloud-based platform, if it's proprietary, such as Salesforce is a proprietary, they have their own scripting language, their own development language, that is the biggest single challenge that we face. For example, in our case, finding qualified senior Salesforce developers in Canada, particularly in Montreal, which everyone knows is the hub of technology, it is an extremely difficult process. So what in San Francisco would take a week to fill a position for a senior Salesforce dev in Montreal can easily take us anywhere from a month to 6 months to find a candidate. It is a very, very, very difficult process. So the key there is finding tools that allow us to mitigate the Salesforce proprietary piece. So we use tools like Heroku that allow me to sort of leverage just standard Java code with no proprietary piece in it. which allows us to gateway into Salesforce and out of Salesforce without having this absolute dependence on Apex or other proprietary languages that Salesforce imposes, essentially. But certainly, talent is a key factor for us.
So prior to your Thinking Capital experience, had you ever dealt with anything in terms of outsourcing, or was it always legacy systems? And how did that piece, I know you talked a little bit about it before, but how did that piece influence your decision when you came into a Thinking Capital environment, especially in terms of speed and agility? And
I absolutely had used outsourcing before, and we had outsourced large developments to third-party companies, and it's a mixed bag, and anyone that's ever used outsourcing for development understands that. The key is in maintaining the knowledge in-house. You can't give the keys to the castle away, which is the mistake that a lot of people make. If the people that are building your software are also the people that are building out the rule sets and building out the specifications of said software, you will ultimately find yourself in trouble because you've given away the knowledge and suddenly you're dependent on a third party. So what we do is we silo that out. Anything we give to a third party in and of itself has no value. We will work with multiple third parties to build out segments of any build that we're working on. And then it's our internal teams that will assemble all the pieces. It's our internal teams that'll vet all the code. It's our internal teams that'll QA everything. We don't allow QA to take place outside of our internal teams.
That's kind of an interesting point as we see the landscape shift, certainly you guys see it a lot more in the US, but certainly in Canada where partnerships are becoming much more, a larger focus for us. The question then becomes, what part do you control versus what part they control?
So I guess we're talking about intellectual property here, and the key for someone such as our organization is that our entire business is based on a lending engine. So that knowledge is never outsourced. No part of our decisioning engine is outsourced. That's fully built in-house. Multiple people contribute to it. All the knowledge is in-house. However, partnerships are key because we're trying to be disruptive, and I could never staff up quick enough to meet that next trading instrument that we want to produce or next product we want to put on the market. So leveraging partnerships, multiple partnerships, allows me to build product at an exponential rate relative to trying to staff up quick enough and build out that knowledge in-house quick enough to get that much product out. It's very difficult because we're competing against large organizations that have 900 developers on staff. I've got 22. So partnering with development firms is key. It allows us to take up a lot larger footprint than we otherwise could.
For sure. So, I guess the next question for you is really moving forward, what's the biggest challenge that you see in terms of your side of the house?
So in our case, we're a disruptive organization. We're trying to disrupt the market. We're trying to change the way lending is seen in Canada. The US is a market that's a lot more evolved in that regard. We're essentially trying to duplicate a lot of what's already been successful here. Ultimately, in Canada, originally through traditional lending institutions, small business would require 30 days to get money for any given loan application he processed. And then smaller organizations such as us come out, and we're getting money in the hands of small businesses in 3 or 4 days from the moment of application. The goal and the challenge and what we live by in the technology group is we want to get to days, plural, to days, singular, to hours. So really where we're headed is to be able to approve and underwrite a loan to a small business within hours. And certainly with the amount of data we collect, with the different sources of data that we use to help us decision, the way our decisioning engine creates a holistic view of somebody's capacity to pay, there's no reason for us not to be able to get money in someone's account within hours. And especially because there's no compliance, it makes it a little easier.
That's right. So thanks for that. If you guys have any questions for us, we'd certainly be happy to take some questions. And I guess the ultimate thing is to build or not to build.
I think if you want to be disruptive, you've got to take what's available. Building out a financial platform has taken banks 40 years to perfect. I think that using cloud-based technology is the key to smaller organizations like many of the people in this room today being disruptive and quick to market and challenging the status quo, challenging the way lending is seen today. That's the key.
Great.
So there's no answer. In other words, you've got to do both.
Thank you.
So we did get a few questions. I'm going to start with, how do you balance outsourcing with your own devs? How do they work together?
That's always going to be a challenge because there's innate competition between development firms and between developers in general. The key there is, again, ensuring that the intellectual property and the knowledge exists on our end. We truly do use development partners as outsourcers of certain pieces. They're never really aware of what it is the end goal of their build is. They just know that they have a deliverable, they deliver it. And I put all the control in the hands of our side, of our development team. So they're the ones that manage that relationship. So they develop friendships and they understand, and they develop understanding of what it is that's being exchanged between both organizations. Okay. But it is always a challenge.
The next one is, to what degree does technology play a part in your organization's strategy, which you've really talked a lot about?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, in any business today, technology is central, in my opinion. So for us, it's no different. You know, we're building a platform, as Pat described, that is going to have a decisioning engine behind it that is really fast, really agile, and really quick. So for me, you know, when I think of strategy, it's absolutely in the forefront and will continue to be.
Okay. And then there's one more. What are some of the platforms, technologies you considered?
I guess that would mean as an alternative to Salesforce.
Yeah.
In our case, there really is no alternative. There's multiple platforms that could be considered with regards to cloud computing. So whether it be an Amazon product or a Microsoft product or a Salesforce product, all of them can suit anybody's needs if customized enough. In our case, I walked into something that was already existing. A lot of code had already been built. Not to mention the fact that I do believe that from a CRM perspective and platform, Salesforce is at the forefront of what they can offer because we can piggyback marketing and sales and telephony, and there's really very little we can't piggyback off their ecosystem. It's quite mature.